What is up, everybody? Welcome to Where All the Ladies At. And today is Thursday. Sorry, I fixed my hair. Today's Thursday. That means we're talking about ladies in history. And this month I have decided to cover warrior queens, or queens that basically expanded their power greatly. And so I've got some great names on tap. If you haven't seen Monday's edition, make sure you go back and check it out. This month we are covering Illyrian goddesses. And if you don't know where Illyria is, go watch the podcast. It'll tell you. Or listen to the podcast. Whichever place that you are finding me, whether you're finding me on YouTube or on Spotify, those are the two places that you can find me. And so no matter where you're at, go back and check that out so you guys get a good idea. As for this day's episodes, we are talking about, like I said, fierce warrior queens, and that's going to include the lady we're talking about today, which is Tomyris, and I think I'm pronouncing that right. There's Tuta, who's an Illyrian queen. We're going to talk about King Tamar of Georgia. Finally, I know I've teased about that before, but finally I got the nerves up to do it. I think that they will not kick me out of Georgia if I mess up a little bit. I don't think I will. I've really gone through and tried to find everything I could on her. And as maybe you don't know, I do live in the country of Georgia. I do not live in the United States. I live in the country in Central Asia. Don't get mad at me. That's how it is on the map. Georgians are very sensitive about that. They feel that they're part of Europe, and I think culturally and that kind of stuff maybe, but on the map, you're in Central Asia. So I think it's called Central Asia. West Asia? It's right on the border. It's in the Caucasus Mountains. I'm probably making a whole bunch of people mad. So I'll stop talking about that, but also Kubaba as well. So some really cool queens that maybe you haven't heard of, or maybe you have. But whatever is the case, we're going to put a light on them, because I think a lot of things are put on men who did great things. Kings. The kings are so important. We talk about Henry VIII and King Charles, and we talk about King Philip, and we talk about all these kings. You know, King Wenceslas. I don't know. I just wanted to say Wenceslas. Let's just be real. So, yeah, a lot of these queens are going to be based in the Central Asia area or Eastern Europe. Just because I feel like a lot of that history is not really talked about unless you're from that area. So I find them super interesting. There are a lot of ladies that I don't know. And if you're wondering who I am, I am Kim. I am your host. I am a freaking lover of history. I'm a nerd. I'm addicted. I love to learn new things, and history is so fascinating to me. And I do believe that old adage, like, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it. I think we might be experiencing that right now in the world, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, and this is a podcast where, as you can tell, we dive deep into history, myth, and legend, and really talk about the ladies, shine the light on them, because there's a lot of badass ladies that don't get any credit, and that's not right. And in case you didn't know, I'm a feminist. Also, I just think that so much of our history has been lost or forgotten or rewritten, definitely rewritten, that it's good to focus on this stuff. So, coming off the heels of Women's History Month, and if you haven't heard or listened to those podcasts, go back and check them out. There's some awesome stuff that happened there. We're just focusing on this stuff. So, per the usual, what I like to do is do a little housekeeping. So if you want to reach out to me, you can most definitely do that. I have social media. I have an email. You can just comment on the video, or if you're watching on YouTube, that would be great. I would love to hear from you guys. If you guys want to support the podcast, you can do that as well. Financially, there's ways to do that. There's Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. And if you don't have any cash on hand because eggs are too damn expensive, then you can definitely just like, comment, follow, share, all that kind of subscribe, all that kind of good stuff. That would be amazing. The more you guys interact with the videos or the podcast audio, the more the algorithm sees that people are liking what I'm doing, and the more it's going to put me out to more people, and that means more people to discuss and learn about these amazing ladies, and that's actually what I really want in life. So with that being said, I think that's the shameless plugging and housekeeping for today. Let's get started into Tomyris. I think I'm saying her name right. Alright guys, so Tomyris was queen of the Massagetae, and I think that's how you say it. This was basically an empire, a country, I don't know, in Central Asia. And she would have been very present in the 500s. So 6th century BCE, we're going all the way back. And I have taken to, just for the next couple until we get used to it, letting everybody know, I do use BCE. I do not use BC. The reason I say that is because I do know there are some countries that still say BC, but academically most people say BCE, and that means before Common Era instead of before Christ. That's kind of where that goes. So let's get started. What was going on? What the heck was up in Central Asia during the 6th century BC? Let's go back. Let's jump into our time machine, okay? Basically, it was a vast, windswept landscape, right? And it had a lot of nomadic tribes floating around. And this was, but they weren't just like sitting, they tend the garden. The Massagetae, I hope I'm saying that right, tribe, which is the one that Tomyris ruled, were pretty tough. They lived on horseback. They fought like warriors. They didn't really like outsiders rolling up into their area. Life was not really about cities or kingdoms. It was kind of about mobility and survival. The Massagetae, like all the rest of the nomadic groups, really followed the herds and set up temporary camps instead of building permanent settlements. Basically, everything was revolved around their horses, right? If you needed to travel, you took a horse. If you needed to fight, you rode a horse. If you needed to impress one, you showed off your horse riding skills, right? And if you couldn't handle a horse, you were not in a good deal, right? They were expert archers and really fearless in battle from what could be told. By the way, let me pause for a second. Everything we're saying is pretty much conjecture, right? Because we weren't there. But archaeologists and historians have done a lot of research, and this is what they've found, and this is what they've put together. So everything I'm saying is basically what we assume was going on, right? So going back to this, they were archers. They really fearless in battle. They liked spears, battle axes. Composite bows were big for them. Warfare wasn't an occasional event. It was like kind of like the way of life at that point. Raiding and defending the territory were basically just routine, just like gathering food was. And their diet was heavy on meat and dairy, no fancy breads. They roasted meat, fermented mare's milk, whatever they could hunt or herd was pretty much it. The Massagetae were doing their thing, right, along with the other nomadic tribes of this region. But then somebody came knocking. They said, hello, we want your land, right? And that was the Persian Empire, which really spread out a lot at this time. And at this time, they were being led by Cyrus the Great. Now, he was expanding really, really fast. He was gobbling up territory, and this guy had taken down some pretty powerful kingdoms already, the kingdom of Lydia and Babylon. And then he looked at the Massagetae, and he saw another group of people that he wanted to conquer. But the Massagetae were they were kind of a different beast. They were different from the ones that he had already conquered, right? So basically what was happening in Central Asia was a lot of expansion and a lot of, change happening because of this expansion and because of this encroaching of other people into the land. The nomadic tribes were starting to feel the pressure a little bit, right? Now, when it came to women in the Massagetae, you know, a lot of times when we think about women back in the day, we think about weaving and, you know, taking care of the husbands. But the Massagetae had a little bit of different, right? Women were trained to fight, they could own property, they could even lead armies, right? In society, the nomadic societies, basically everyone had to contribute, right? They had to contribute to that survival. There was no room to be like, girls can't do this and guys can only do this. Like, there was none of that, right? Women trained with the men. They learned to ride, they learned to hunt, they learned to fight. They were allowed to participate in warfare. They were actually expected to fight, right? A Massagetae woman wasn't considered ready for adulthood unless she could hold her own in battle, you know? So there was no debutante balls and big fluffy dresses. It was like a horse, a bow, and go out and do your thing, right? Marriage was a little different too, from everything we could tell. Massagetae women had more freedom in choosing their partners. They weren't traded off like political chess pieces, like a lot of the times in the medieval ages, and their voices really mattered. If a woman decided she didn't want to stay in a marriage, she had the power to leave. Of course, there was no drama. She just packed her horse up and went. So Tomyris really was an anomaly when we get to talking about her. She came from a culture where women had real power, okay? And it wasn't about breaking any glass ceilings. It was just kind of normal, right? Leadership among the Massagetae wasn't based on gender, but on strength and ability. If you could command respect, you could lead, whether you were a man or a woman. And that's what the woman we're going to talk about did, right? Tomyris. So who was Tomyris? So here's the thing. She wasn't just like a random warrior that just happened to work her way into being the queen. She was really kind of born into it, right? Her father was the previous ruler of the Massagetae, but he trained her from a very early age to be a leader. Strength mattered in this society way more than gender. So she really proved herself at being capable of handling responsibilities, right? They just didn't hand the crowns just to anyone, right? So you had to earn it. Thomas grew up learning the skills of warfare, strategy, diplomacy, all of that, right? She knew how to fight, but more importantly, she knew how to lead. And when her father passed away, she didn't just step into the role of queen, she owned it, right? Tomyris wasn't ruling from the sidelines. She didn't sit on the fancy throne, and she didn't let the men handle all the messy stuff. She was really out there. She made strategic decisions. She commanded warriors, and she really ensured that her people were strong enough to defend their land. And because here's the thing, as we talked about at the beginning, Cyrus the Great was like expanding into the region, but she didn't see that as something that was going to happen, and he should have seen too. So that's kind of a little bit about her. Obviously, it's so far back, there's not a lot to say, like not a lot of things about her, but we're going to look at a little historical and archaeological evidence to help fortify our knowledge on her reign, right? So nobody wrote a book back in 530 BC, like a biography. So most of what we know about Tomyris comes from ancient historians, right? The Greek Herodotus. Herodotus, though, was kind of known for mixing facts with a little bit of drama because, history books without action or intrigue would be boring, right? So he gives us the most detailed account of Tomyris's battle with Cyrus, and his version of events is generally accepted as the main source. Other classic historians also did it. Strabo, Apollonius also mention her, kind of paint this picture of this really fierce warrior queen who stood up to one of history's most powerful empires. Now, the problem is these accounts were written centuries after the events took place, much like a lot of history, right? So that means some details might have got lost, maybe they were exaggerated, or just some, there was holes in the story, so these historians said, hey, let's put some stuff in there, right? So basically we're working off of like several centuries later's information, and so once again we have to take what we know with a grain of salt, but it does look like she was this fierce warrior. Now for archaeology it gets a little trickier because the Massagetae were a nomadic people, so they didn't leave behind massive stone monuments. They didn't no cities, just like the Persians did. What we do have are some Scythian burial mounds, weapons, and artifacts that kind of give us a clue about the warrior culture. Some historians believe that Tomyris' people were closely related to the Scythians, and so that's another group of steppe warriors that just Scythians like, yeah, they're very cool. If you've never read about them, check them out. They are some serious badasses. But for a solid, like, carved in stone record of Tomyris, we don't have anything. Her story has lived on for like 2,500 years, but it's been passed down through history and art, and there's been some modern films. And so you're still being talked about. You had to have done something legendary, but it wasn't. There's no definitive purpose. Now, we talked a little bit. We're going to talk about the big story that comes from Tomyris. And the biggest story that comes from Tomyris is her versus Cyrus, right? And how that whole battle played out. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the Persian Empire, because I think you have to understand what the Persian Empire was doing in order to really get an idea of how epic this story between Tomyris and Cyrus is, right? So Tomyris was up against not just some random warlord, right? It was Cyrus the Great, ruler of the Persian Empire. He was, at the time, he was like the biggest and baddest guy, right? By the 6th century BC, Persia had already conquered massive chunks of land, stretching from modern-day Iran to parts of the Middle East and Central Asia. Cyrus was good at war, but he was also a master strategist. He didn't charge in with swords drawn. Sometimes he used diplomacy, sometimes he used trickery, or sometimes he just flattered them, to get what he wanted. And most of the time it worked. But when he started going into Central Asia, things were a little different there. So the Persian army was used to fighting settled civilizations with city walls, right? It's a lot more easy than fighting nomadic warriors who lived on horseback. And that's kind of why things went so sideways for Cyrus, was because he just wasn't used to this type of warrior, right? He could go into cities, he could go into diplomacy, he could do all those things with the bigger cities, but when you're dealing with a group of people that don't really have a settled base, it's really hard, number one, to find them, and number two, to really take advantage of any of that other kind of strategic power that you have. So you have to switch up your thoughts. Which is why when Cyrus entered the Massagetae area, he first said he started with trying to do diplomacy. So he sends a message to Queen Tomyris saying basically, what if we hook up? What if we get married? And Tomyris is like, I don't think so. She knows there's definitely not love. He's only been here for a couple days, and sometimes that happens, right? Love at first sight. I'm a romantic. I believe that exists. But in this situation, it seems a little fishy, right? So she knows that it's not really love. She knows that, this culture, this empire is looking to invade her lands. So she basically says, thanks, but I'm not really into that so much. As Cyrus, gets a little ticked off. He's like, this should have worked. I'm handsome. I'm a good looking guy. Look, I got a whole empire. Why is she rejecting me? And so he's like, okay, well, then we'll just have to do this the hard way, right? So he said, okay, we're going to attack. So he tries a little trickery, right? He's like, okay, maybe this works out really right. So he kidnaps Tomyris' son. I'm going to have to read this. Spargapasis, right? Because they were in battle. So he kidnaps him, right? And the young prince, rather than live as a prisoner, he takes his own life. By the way, warning, right? Now, not only has he tried and got rejected, but now he's cost Tomyris her son. And that makes her even more mad, right? So Tomyris is now going to be a problem for him, right? She doesn't like what happened, so she rallies her warriors and she meets Cyrus head on in battle. And she wins. Not just wins, not just like a little win, like she destroys the Persian army, according to the story. Cyrus actually was allegedly killed in this battle. And in a move that would make pretty much any action director really kind of like, woo, Tomyris orders his head to be cut off and dunked into a vat of blood. And just to make the point more, like that's just puts a little like period on the point, right? She defeats the army, she defeats the emperor, she cuts his head off, she dumps it in blood. And for the first time, Persia has met an enemy that they just couldn't conquer. And it was a woman that made this happen because she refused to back down. Like that story, here's the thing. Once again, the story of the battle, there's some historians that debate whether Cyrus was actually killed in the battle. There's some that debate the details. But if just a quarter of that story is true, Tomyris may be one of the baddest ass women in the world, because she was like, screw you. Let me show you what we can do. Oh yeah, and you know what? Because we defeated you, I'm gonna embarrass you in front of your people. Oh, what a woman. What a woman, And more than, now you hear the story, you might be thinking that's a cool story, but why? What does that matter, right? But Tomyris's win just wasn't like a personal win. It was kind of this moment in history where the barbarian people held their own against this massive empire. Her story has inspired artists and writers and filmmakers. In fact, and I want to find this movie because I think it would be really cool. In 2019, I guess Kazakhstan made a whole movie about her, and it's called Tomyris. And so I want to see that movie. I have some ways to Google and find. I'm actually pretty close to Kazakhstan, so maybe it'd be easier for me to sign. But even behind that, you have to look at her and as a symbol of resistance, right? No matter how powerful your enemy is, if you stand your ground, you can win. That's kind of her story, I mean, here she is, like I said, up against at that time, they were the biggest empire, I believe. And she was like, nope, sorry, I got my tents, I got my horses, I got my warriors. Here's my composite bows, here's some death, right? That's kind of just how it happened. I think that if I was taking away anything from these stories, I'd say don't underestimate the little guy. Remember, rejection can really be about them and not you. And if you're going to start a war, don't really mess with someone who keeps their enemies' heads as trophies. Those are all solid lessons to learn from Tomyris' story. And also, just stand up, because even if you don't think you can win, if you're in the right, you might be surprised, kind of thing. And that's Tomyris, guys. I hope you enjoyed learning about her. I sure did. And I actually have another movie on my list of things to watch this year. So that's amazing. I hope I can find it dubbed in English. I don't speak Kazakhstani. I think that's what the language is called. I'm not sure. I could have made a mistake. But yeah, I don't speak it. And I also don't speak Russian. So maybe I can get my partner to help me out with that. We'll see how it goes. Or I'll just watch it in Russian and translate it with Google Translate. That happens a lot over here. Anyways, if you guys have seen the movie, let me know how it is. And that's it, guys. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed. And I can't wait to tell you the stories about the other badass, fierce warrior queens that we're going to talk about. As always, as I said at the beginning, if you want to reach out to me, there's ways to do that in the description box. There's also ways to support the podcast, both financially, and if you can't do it financially, please just like, follow, subscribe, review, all that kind of good stuff. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, all of those will help, because the more you do, the more my name will get out to people. If you want more information on Tomyris and many others, then make sure you check out the medium publication that goes with this. And if you're into mystical, magical, spiritual stuff, make sure you check out my other podcast called Our Mystic Road Trip. There's a link in the description, or you can just search it. It'll come up. That is it for this week, guys. As always, please stay safe, stay curious, and stay blessed.